Yeah, really. And I want you all to see her. Is it possible? Hi.
Hello.
As far as we will talk about poetry, the good thing to start with poetry. And I think Ia will read a couple of poems, and then Amelia will read English translations. Are you okay to read?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alena, for introducing us. Just a little bit Ukrainian. Amelia, що ми читаємо?
Is the volume okay?
Що?
Yeah, Ia is asking what poems she should...
Let's start with Носи Широти. Is okay?
Yes, I have my own conductor. I'm sorry.
I can say, may I say something first about how I started to translate Ia's poetry? Just for a moment.
Okay.
I met Ia about 4.5 years ago in Kyiv, the last time I was here. And I was together with my friend and colleague, Yulia Ilchuk, and we started to translate her poetry we actually started immediately, but we really did more of it during COVID because we were, sort of lonely and stir crazy, and we were reading a lot of poetry. And we started to translate several different Ukrainian poets, including Ia, whose verse we really fell in love with. And we had all of this poetry together, and then we were starting to shop it around to make a volume of different Ukrainian poets, contemporary Ukrainian poets. And in the middle of negotiating with various editors about this volume, the full-scale invasion happened in February of 2022. And so we sent a few of Ia's poems to LitHub, which is a big online journal in the United States. And it was published on February 25th. And so Ia was sort of the first of a series of poems, of poets, that we started to share with American readers on this venue. So it's really kind of wonderful for us that we now have just maybe 2 months ago sent a full manuscript to Harvard's Ukrainian Studies Press. We're hoping it will come out within this calendar year. Hoping, and it's really just so nice to be here with you in this wonderful city and able to read with Ia again here in Kyiv. So I had to say a couple of words of introduction.
Probably you have also your own story about this start of work together with Amelia, Ia.
I have totally different story.
Okay.
That, how I don't remember it. I have problem with memory and without full invasion, but after more and more, deeper and deeper, I remember that Yulia, we wrote in friends on Facebook with Yulia Ilchuk, because Yulia from my region, Donetsk region, originally too, and for me it was like, I don't know, some warm connection, and not only like the scholar. And one day Yulia wrote to me that, hello, we want to meet with you today, I and Amelia. And it was this менше більше, I don't know, less or more, a small restaurant in front of the Golden Gate Church and underground station. And girls said they are interested in translation. But after that, I didn't hear about this work, nothing. And if I know correctly, it was situation, no, unfortunately not so good for us, that Many people who were interested in Ukrainian poetry, not during the war, but at all, people who were interested in Ukrainian literature couldn't find publishers before at all, and couldn't find enough attention for Ukrainians, our history in centuries and now, and war on his full scale level brought us with attention, and further it was in Amelia's version, yes.
Ladies, are you ready to read poetry, or I will ask you one more question? So we will start from Ukrainian version of poetry. So, Iya,
Okay,
are you ready?
Yes. Носиш у роті великий тлумачний смітник, цю подряпану скриню з паперовою зброєю, якою тепер ні поцілити, ні зцілити. Смерті залізна вода дзеленчить під повіками. Гортаєш порожні, мов білі зіниці слова, що віною смердять, як застаріла хвороба. І не розумієш, на що багаття культури. Світ так довго розпалював, а самий не згорів. Носиш на пошту любові списки живих. І не знаєш, як вивчити мову злого мовчання. Час у горлі стоїть, як зіпсутий годинник історії, і вкривається пилом змарнілих життів. Ходиш, як вуличний пес із хрестиком у зубах, муляєш миру очі присутністю зайвою, смикаєш ніч задовгий, мов подзвін язик, лежиш ті у землі з нерухомленим язиком.
You've got an unabridged explanatory dumpster in your mouth, this scratched up chest of paper weapons that can no longer make a hole or make whole. Death's iron water jingles beneath your eyelids. You flip through words, empty as white pupils that stink of war like an old disease. And you don't understand how the world kept the bonfire of culture lit so long without burning down. You bring a list of the living to Love's post office, and you can't master the language of harsh silence. Time gets stuck in your throat like history's broken clock and gets covered by the dust of withered lives. You walk like a stray dog with a cross in your teeth, annoy the world with your presence, pull the night by its long bell-like tongue, lick the earth's body with your numb tongue.
Do you want to read more?
I think we should read a few more, yeah. And the reason we've never started with this one before, but the reason that I wanted to begin with it is that I sort of liked the image of the Love's post office, this idea of sort of poems being sent out and words being sent out, languages maybe being brought out of Ukraine, whether or not they're ready to be. And part of my process as a translator, working with Ukrainian contemporary poets in the midst of a war, and even really before the full-scale invasion, is that it's very humbling because I'm aware of the fact that I'm not going through the day-to-day anxiety that people here are usually. I'm needing to translate both emotionally and also poetically and linguistically. And so there's all these phases of mediation, but it does really feel like translating these very intense gestures of hope into English. And there's a need for it in the United States, both because people in the United States need to understand what's happening in Ukraine, but also I think Ukrainians have led the way for the rest of the world right now in fighting totalitarianism. And in the United States, we're at risk of slipping into a kind of totalitarianism. It's not exactly the same thing as, as Putin. But, we have an election coming up that may or may not be fair, that may or may not be contested. And I think Americans need this idea of what is worth fighting for, what is actually worth working for.
Yeah, are you ready to read next one? And whether do you know which one is next?
Yes, that would be important to remind ourselves what our next poem is. Maybe Ia 8 років.
Okay, it's short, yes. It was just a moment. My first poem after full invasion, and it was 3 weeks after. But in my mind, I felt it like, I don't know, 2 years. It was time that I read the same in colleagues, like with Sofia Andruchovich quote, perhaps that before war I was a writer, and that I couldn't find any sense in writing, and writing about war especially. It was like traumatic, perhaps, reaction, and that time we had more important things like volunteering, like trying to find connections between people, and like, I don't know, doing directly in physical reality and don't create anything. 8 років казати: в мене вдома війна, щоб нарешті прийняти: мій дім – це війна. І потяг повільний зі сходу на захід країни, у якому смерть життя перевозить. Ніч заходить у землю содомами квітів змарнілих і лягає в роти нам гнилими зубами мовчання. Наша мова тепер волонтерсько-біженський чад, у якому сирени співають пісень Одіссею. Наша пам'ять тепер брудна, вишиванка свободи, її довга хода від серця до серця.
Eight years of saying, back home, there's a war. So I finally accept it. My home is a war. It's a slow train cross country, east to west, where death transports life. Night falls to the ground with the spasms of wilted flowers and lies down in our mouths with teeth rotten from silence. Now our language is volunteer refugee chatter, where sirens sing songs to Odysseus. Now our memory is freedom-stained vyshivanka, her long walk from heart to heart.
Do you want to read more poems?
I think we should read a few, yeah.
Okay.
And this one, I will note, after we translated this, I noticed that in the comment thread of the post to Facebook, there were so many translations into so many different languages, including like Malayalam and Estonian and Italian. There were this poem hit so many people in all of these different countries in different ways, which is very striking. This idea of it's sort of home being war.
Amelia,
yes.
it's only because it's very short.
Maybe that helps. But you have shorter poems that were, didn't strike.
Sometimes,
Other people
yes.
have shorter poems that didn't get translated as much.
It's easier with supporting translations only.
She is very humble.
8 lines, yes. I think well, for me it will be interesting to hear Olena's question.
Yes.
More than reading.
What do you mean?
You ask if we want to read more. For me, it's more interesting to hear your question.
Okay.
Let's start. So, yeah, I will start with question for you. You have one essay where you start this essay by quoting a question that you are often asked during the participation in different international literature or poetry events. What can poetry do in the time of war? I would like you to tell us a little about your experience as a poet whose texts are translated in different languages, including English. How did you feel and realize the act of your poetic work during these 2 years?
Oh. Our beautiful, deep Ukrainian conversations. I'm sorry, please repeat me the main idea because I can catch.
That's the question you were asked often during poetic international events. What can poetry do in the time of war?
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I spent night without sleeping, it a little bit slow. No, it was like self-irony. I don't know. I'm really very ironic and self-ironic person, but not all people see it in my poetry and many I don't know text or only on Facebook. I don't know. It's like apathetic way of understanding that when we have culture, when we have poetry, when we have this opportunity to express ourselves, it doesn't look like something very important, but after these centuries of colonization, all we understand that this is first time in our history, perhaps I'm not correctly, but when we really realize our identity. We speak from this our identity, and we want to show our identity, to save our identity. I don't know to fix, and it's for me poetry is like our presence, like on my private level. For me, poetry is a way of my private being in this world. And for Ukrainians now, poetry is that we exist, and we have very strong voices. I don't know. I very often see this great difference between during international events between Ukrainian poems. What about on language level, not only about topic, on language level, because this one topic force us again find more deeper and deeper words, stronger and stronger metaphors, or another way, like anti-poetry, then we like protest about this so-called beauty peace world, and such poetry is very strong. Sometimes I see that it's not very comfortable situation for other poets from different countries to stay nearby, because for many people the I don't know, the most tragic event in their lives was pandemic. and for us it's like joke. And only in such countries like Croatia, I heard silence with understandable silence. In this essay, I try to answer for myself with defending of humanity, because only art and love, and it's like paradox that a lot of poems of contemporary Ukrainian poets are not only about war, but also about love. Love like word that we put into our poems, and love like something between lines, like our motivations, because from like many people think abroad that it's hatred, but this is hatred in this Bible sense. But in our hearts, it's love. It's love too. It's like two with sides of one coin, with hatred and love, because we really, I don't know, like broken heart of with love to our people, to our country, to many things in Ukraine, and Ukrainians, and hatred. It's like a wounded animal who cries, and this defending of humanity, because I don't know that only poetry on this very emotional level can find these connections and we find this common language. No, like I wrote this essay like from my only poet perspective, but it's the task of literature and art at all to find common language, because all we readers of literature use not only language of our parents, or I don't know, children from our classes, but also language of books, languages in plural, which we read. And now I think Ukrainian poetry can show how it's important to be human, how it important to have these moral values, because with postmodernism, with irony, with all this, you know what I mean, that all is not serious. We here for enjoying this love, to have, I don't know, it's not easy for me to imagine what can be values for other people, but Ukrainians, and that's why Ukrainian literature, and that's why Ukrainian poetry, because Ukrainian poetry is like this drags from pain for us, with very, very quick drags that we put to our Venus, and that this moral things, like dignity, yes, like, I don't know, shame, are very important. And these things in reality make us people, not, I don't know, expensive things or rests on some expensive islands. And I don't know, perhaps now Ukrainian poetry is like Socrates in this ancient time. Ukrainian poetry, time after time by time, step by step, try to return attention of people to very important things, and all we understand that this situation not only about Ukraine, this situation about totally destroyed international system of humanitarian law and not humanitarian law and system of safety, and all we see that then people don't want to think about volors and really volors. Evil goes ahead, step by step. I'm not sure that this is the answer, and and one remark that very often I see such situation with translation into Bulgarian, with translation into Italian some weeks ago, that to take this bread at the railway station during translation, translators told me that for people in Italy it will not be understandable. How it's possible? They tried it to translate it like bread gratis, but bread gratis is something different. And very often I hear that we didn't have war from about century, or from, I don't know, 2 generations. We don't understand about, but I usually ask what is about with your memory and in your families. Why do you not? Why do you not know about these family stories? Because I can understand it in Ukraine then with totalitarianism, but in many other countries I don't understand why people don't want to think about this.
Thank you very much that you show this presence of love in Ukrainian war poetry, because I think that that's the most important thing about this kind of artistic expression. And what you were talking about, ununderstandable places, ununderstandable connotations inside of Ukrainian poetry, is deeply connected with my question to Amelia. I will quote one of your interview where you said that Ukrainian poets sometimes describe that what they are doing as translating the war into words. And you also mentioned poetry and your own experience of translating her texts. And what does it mean to translate war into words? And what does it mean to translate such a translation into another language?
I mean, so first of all, I don't think that perfect translation is ever possible. I think the whole point of translation is that it's not possible. It's not the same language. It's not the same words. It's not the same experience. It's not the same culture. But you can try to get as close as you can, right? You can try to get very, very close. And the literary theorist Gayatri Spivak talks about translation as the need to surrender to the original. The translator, it's almost a sort of giving in and allowing the original to take over. And for me, that's very important in translating the experience of war, especially among contemporary poets. I have this advantage that I know Iya, and I can call her up and we can work together on Zoom. So I can ask her what she meant by something. If I were translating, Socrates, if I were translating someone from thousands of years ago, Sappho, I would not be able to do this. And so it is a process of, it's really a conversation that I feel that I'm having not only with Iya, but sort of with Ukrainian, I'm really kind of learning the language as I am translating it. And fortunately, there are 2 of us doing it together. So we're sitting there sort of massaging the language. And then we have Iya, who sits with us and goes through a lot of the language with us. And I think it's a sort of extreme version of what translation always is, which is to know that you're not going to get it exactly right, but to do your best to try to understand this ununderstandable thing. Because war is sort of untranslatable. Every war is going to be a little bit different. Every person's experience of war is going to be a little bit different. but it's absolutely essential that other people try to understand it, right? It's almost a paradox. And so that's been, really my experience. It's very much a learning. It's a bit like, learning any language, learning this, this particular poetic language that's talking about war. So that's been my, I think that's one of the things that's drawn me to these poems, that it is a process of absolutely giving into another experience, to this relationship with something happening outside of me.
You started your poetry readings with a poem about тлумачний смітник, and it is a line from a poem which ironically emphasizes the untranslatability of the experience of war. And it is also the beginning of your presentation. And I think it's a good time to show it to the audience, if you are okay with it.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be really happy to share. I was going to share a little bit of the other work that I've been doing with contemporary Ukrainian poetry. And there are a couple of other poems that I would love to read with Iya. Iya, would you like to read another poem or two now, or would you rather wait until after I've shared the archive?
Yes or no?
I don't know. I think after.
After, okay, great. So I have control of this.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I can. I have to press something up. I think we're on as, oh, there we go, beautiful. So I'm going to just move through some of these early slides. We've talked a little bit about this poem, The 8 Years, and I think one of the important things that, okay. Okay. I think one of the really important things for me about this poem is that it's a poem about using the war itself as a metaphor for the war. And one of the things that I'm noticing about a lot of the poetry about war is that poets will use metaphors, but metaphors are always showing us two different things at once, right? So, what else are we being asked to see when we are looking at home is a slow train cross country? If I were to say my home is like a cloud, then I would be asking you to look at the cloud. But here, you're being asked by Iya to look at the home, but also to look at the train. And these two things are very close together. And, the language is volunteer refugee chatter. That's actually what people are speaking. Memory is a stained vyshyvanka, the vyshyvanka that people are wearing. And so the metaphor of war for me as a translator has become very important to kind of get inside of, to understand that metaphor is a way of communicating a second layer of war and also of this day-to-day experience. Yes.
Probably I will ask Iya here.
Yes, please, why don't you step
Because we talk about metaphor, you talk also about metaphors, that you need much more deeper metaphors writing poetry during Russian-Ukrainian war, especially during these 2 years. But how are metaphors created in your text now? Do you feel that something very important is changed in creation of metaphors now? Iya?
In reality, I'm not in the same situation. Are you hearing me? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Like other our poets, because for whom war wasn't their own experience. Yes, a lot of people wrote something about war after 2014, or didn't. I don't know. I remember that Oleg Kotsalev told me many years ago that he didn't write about war because no, this is not his experience. No, now we know that Russian soldiers lived in his house and others in other details of his family biography. And I see some process that staged that I I passed before, that it was like very simple things. I don't know, like is the cold war in the tap, is a hot war in the tap, or opposite? It was this poem is was translated more than about 30 languages, but it's very simple. It's like description, but no good idea with comparing water and war, but in reality it's without metaphors. Now I on language level, I don't feel something interesting for me inside, but after I don't know, 3 months or more, I felt something like that impotention to say something, because no, every day new and new victims, new and new challenge. No, something very simple to do at the railway station. I don't know, to find for somebody something, to a lot. We all remember this period very well, and I described it like topic. This topic of language that I like this. I don't feel words in my mouth, and I was in this situation, this refugee station, refugee theater. It was not typical for me. It's for me like closer to narrative poetry, but I don't write narrative poetry, and I only write on my inside level of, I don't know, poetic growing. And last time I noticed that I started to write very long poems. I don't know why, and well, I'm sorry. For me, it's very difficult to think about myself. For me, it's more easy to share with you what I think about other poets, because I more think about what colleagues do, but not I. And I don't know, and when I very often hear this, that, oh, this is not time of metaphor. I'm sorry, I use the same metaphor in modernistic way, like I love, and with visuality, without narratives. And for me, it corresponds with our reality. How we it now from art. Visual arts, always minimalism. After in 15th, how we remember well that for me it's something impossible to organize sentences, words into sentences, like beginning, I don't know, description, culmination, the end. And inside me, I feel in such way. Then I read colleagues. No, like it was with Maxim Krivtsov, for me very similar things I see in his poetry, Boris Gumenyuk with narratives, irony, yes, like our with Solder's poetry, all with irony, because they have right for this irony. We not in the front. We don't have right for such type of irony. And then I tried to explain myself why many our poets among soldiers or paramedics use these narratives. I understand they need to describe. It's like between diary or like in Maxim's case, like short documentary to fix. Because they haven't time a lot. I'm sorry, I don't know how in English still, and try to go with circles around this word. But if we with like civilian poetry, we have a little bit time to understand our feelings and compare something, and I don't know, and no, I don't know. For me, it's very difficult. Sorry, I very slowly. And but I understand one interesting thing that I didn't feel before. 2014, 2022. I remember that I had distance between my experience, my I don't know. Thoughts and writing. No, these three normal stages of writing. But now very often I totally don't understand if it's already a poem or only something in my mind. If it's normal poem or not poem, I can't understand at all. And very often I can treat with poetry like poetry, because for me it's like wounded body of our country. I really very well, I don't have no good memory, but I really very well remember all circumstances of each poem after 24th February, and for me it's not literature at all. This is my main change on the level of feeling inside me.
Thank you very much for this pointing this confusion as the main feeling about a lot of things in our existence, especially in writing also. I think that's the main word to explain this. It's feeling of confusion and impossibility to understand where some kind of reception is ended and some other thing appear to start it. But I will ask also Amale about these new metaphors in Ukrainian poetry. And you translate not only Iya, but also, for example, Halia Kruk and other poets. And do you feel that metaphor disappeared? I think that you do not have such feeling, because you put metaphor as the one main thing in your presentation, but probably you feel that that's the new kind of metaphor.
Yeah.
And do you have a strategy to put it into in English?
Yeah, thank you. No, I think, so metaphors, I don't think they've disappeared. I think they've changed. And, war has changed language. This is something that, for example, Ostap Slivinsky has pointed out in his Slovnik Viny, where he's collected these accounts, small anecdotes that are changing the meaning of everyday words like bath or star or plum, sometimes in sweet ways and often in very grotesque, terrible ways. But yes, for example, there's in Halia Kruk's book that Yulia and I also translated together, there's a poem about a metaphor, right? It's like metafory skladny, namov shvetsarny lij, zlamavся korkotях, pulочка stupila, and so forth, right? So a metaphor that folds like a Swiss Army knife, the corkscrew broke, the file got dull. And it's a metaphor of a metaphor. So the metaphor itself is compared to the Swiss Army knife. I mean, it's rather wonderful, but it's something that I see happening a lot, where poets will call attention to the lack of an available metaphor, and then the metaphor itself folds in. And of course, the metaphor can't, part of the reason the metaphor is broken in this particular poem is that it can't do the thing that really needs to be done, which is to resurrect the dead, right? Which is to bring back these people that have died. The language has fallen short. And I see this a lot. I see this in Ia's poems, where she will talk about certain things not being metaphors. She'll highlight that and say, this one is not a metaphor. Or she will use in her poems, like this train poem, things from the war as metaphors for war, so that metaphors themselves have changed. But I'm kind of, I have this curiosity. I'm a literature scholar, but I have this curiosity about people that do more quantitative analysis. And maybe that's partly because I'm married to someone who's a physicist and does more quantitative analysis. But when I first started to look at contemporary Ukrainian poetry, it was about 2018, something like that. And I was looking at contemporary Ukrainian poetry before this, from 2014. But around 2018, I discovered how much was on Facebook. And 2017, 2018. And I wanted to keep track of it, because I was really interested in Facebook as a place where people would post things and sometimes translate it and sometimes comment on it. And in some cases, even people would be using Facebook as a metaphor, so that it would be, the news feed becomes the gallery of loss in one of Halia Kruk's poems, or people will write about this weird space that is a mixture of all of these different things happening. And I was very lucky. I was on sabbatical at Harvard it was after the pandemic. Everything stopped with the pandemic because I have small children. All I could do was occasionally translate a poem at night, slowly, with Yulia on Zoom. But after the pandemic in 21, 22, I was on sabbatical, and I had a student who was my assistant. She was my designated assistant. It was amazing. And she was a double major in Slavic literature and computer science. And so together, this student, whose name is Paige Lee, she's wonderful, she's now graduated, she and I put together an archive where I could keep better track of this poetry that was posted to Facebook. And the goal was for me to be more organized, rather than having one big document where I was copy pasting the poems that I found interesting and the comment threads that I found interesting so I could search them. She created an interface for me where I could search a poet. I could search a theme, because I was keeping track of the themes. I was tagging the themes for every poem that I copied from Facebook. And I could search the poems themselves, and I could look it up by language. And of course, it was also listed by date. And so we came up with this archive, and that was a way for me to quantitatively, together with my brilliant computer science undergraduate, look at Ukrainian poetry and actually look at ways that words were changing. And I was interested in understanding how Facebook was maybe even changing the poetry, but I was also just interested in keeping track of the poems themselves and finding a way to, how could I look up a theme that, let's say, Ia writes about a train, and I want to see who else has been writing about trains. Is there a way for me to organize this in a sort of almost library catalog system? So if there's a way to show the slide, is that okay? May I show a slide again? Thank you. Ia has seen this. I've been consulting with Ia about this for a while now. Marcy has also seen this. She's consulted on this. But let's see, how do I do this? Okay, there we go. Beautiful. I'm going to skip ahead. I'll skip ahead and then I'll skip backwards again. So this is a picture of my student Paige, who is the web designer for this interface. But you can see it's, can you see? Hopefully I'm not blocking it too much. There's a number of poems that are listed from newest to oldest. And this particular poem is a poem by Halia Kruk that's up on this screen right now. But you can search by author or by theme. And if you look here, we'll see this is a poem by Olena Huseynova, part of a poem because it got cut off. But you can see that if I search for, let's say all poems in Ukrainian, then I'll come up with maybe about 60% of the poems in my archive. If I want to just see which poems are in Georgian, those will probably all be translations. There's something strange on the screen. Okay, there we go. And then you can also see I can look through my list of poets, and there's about maybe 200 total, maybe a bit fewer, that we've been tracking for the last over 2 years now, because we started to do this actually before the full-scale invasion, still in 2021. But these poems are all copy-pasted. They're not scraped. We haven't built a scraper for Facebook. It's too difficult. The other thing to say about these poems, we've taken certain precautions because, of course, Facebook is it's a corporate American entity, and they have exercised all sorts of, incautious practices, right? Going back to the American 2016 elections. So I wanted to be very careful about my use of it. So we just went in and copy pasted poems that are already made public by the poets. And then the only information that we share is the post itself. And then you can go to the original link so that you can see the context where it was posted. And then we can also see a certain number of themes. And those are themes that are tagged by me and my students. I now have a few other undergraduates and some graduate students working with me to enter poems, and they're reading them. Sometimes they're reading them with Google Translate. I have a student who's working on this with me who knows a lot of languages, but none of them are Slavic. So he is using Google Translate, and it's not perfect. There are some mistakes, but we're able to get far more poems this way. And I give him a list of poets that I want for him to include in the archive. And then, and then we can also see that, if I search, for example, a text string, so here I put in Bucha, a number of poems come up under Bucha. There are probably more now. This is a screenshot taken a few months ago. And we can then read poems that include this text string, that actually include this word, Bucha. And this is just, gives you a sense of the metadata. We collect all of the input through Google Forms. It's nothing fancy. And it goes directly to a Google spreadsheet. And then from there, Paige has created this interface, rather user-friendly, I think, interface. And the idea behind it was that I could do my work more efficiently as a translator, but also as a scholar of this poetry. I'm writing a book about poetry. But now that we have an archive of what I just showed you is a little bit outdated. We're at about 1,600 poems now. Maybe 1,700. We'd like to make it public so that readers from outside of Ukraine who are interested in translating a Ukrainian poet might go in, find a poet based on a theme, or find poems based on a poet that they know that they like, and they can read some poems without having to know whose Facebook page to look at. I certainly did not know all of the poets when I started this project who are now part of the archive. So the idea is, my husband calls this a dating app for poets and translators to meet each other and to help translators perhaps find poets to bring more Ukrainian poetry into other languages. So that is this, contemporary archive. And you can see this is Iya. I don't remember when we did this screenshot, but you can see that Iya is very colorful because she is a poet who's had a lot of translations done into a lot of other languages. So she has Belarusian, Hebrew, English, Georgian. She has all of these languages in here, which is always kind of exciting. We're also working right now to build a new part of this website, which is we're trying to link the original poems to their translations, so that when you click on an original poem, you'll see all of the translations of that poem that have already been posted to Facebook. Another thing that we're thinking about doing, but I haven't really decided yet, is perhaps broadening beyond Facebook to include Telegram, and maybe just to include writers' books. So I would need a bigger army of students to help with this if we did that. But yeah, we can go back to Iya now. I wanted to show these poems, but I want to make sure that we can see Iya's face as well for
as far as we were talking about Facebook, I want to ask Iya first, how do you work with social media and poetry during the Russian-Ukrainian war? How do you interact with recipients, and how does it change or not your poetic texts through social media?
I don't know. I don't know answer, because a few days ago I had had Zoom with another one American professor, and he asked me about with social media. I tried to explain him that we use social media in so active way because our citizens, this active part of society, does a lot of work that in other countries usually do institutions, and I don't know, no, like PEN Ukraine do a lot of work that other PEN around the world don't do at all, connected with publishing, with promotion, with many things. No, even without this full-scale period, I don't know that. For me, it's social media. What I do with social media, I don't know. I totally have no abilities to speak with this white space. Hello, friends. Do you remember my post months ago? No poetry in social media. I don't know. Social media, no, but situation changed and have changed. And for me, how I feel after 2014, because this war was my war of Crimean people from Crimea, people from Lugansk district, and soldiers, and no, of course, their families. And it was like a local problem, and I tried to speak, first of all, with Ukrainians, and to explain to other people in my country, because it was very painful for me to understand that people could, with space of safety, very not huge, in reality, to don't think about this. It's not like, it's painful. It's not like I want something bad to these people. It's very psychological thing. And I felt it like I want to people understand what happened, that I don't know. Among people in my region were normal people like my friends who went to protest or do something or did something, other things, and had this really, we didn't use this terminology at the time, but had this Ukrainian identity, how we call it today. And now I see that we keep in our minds auditorium abroad. That's why I thought a lot about difference between poetry in among soldiers and civilians, and I see that if we try to compare, very often our poets, especially poets women, very tragic, because we try to go by upstairs using imagination and to image this war on different levels, like something more bad, more painful, and more painful. And with whom we speak, of course, not only with us, only like using this sharing our emotions, like signals of time, of feelings. We try to show our reality like this great panorama of tragedy to people abroad, because I don't know, we believe in solidarity. First of all, because I don't know, but social media, I don't know, change, but change very, and sometimes I see such thing that we have, I don't know, even on this fourth year of full explanation, I don't know how to talk about this correctly. When we have another one, I'm sorry for this word, tragedy, no, like in Odessa some days ago, and others and others, and somebody among our poets who write so many put on Facebook first poem. I see it's like that after 2 hours another one poet, it's like respond. I don't know, and it's not from vision to write something on this topic. It's like this wave. We like this wave, like I don't know. That this wave go through your body and you start to vibrate. But in this Amelia's sense, how instrumental sense, I don't think about social media at all. On poetry level at all, for me, it's like like a format of saving my poetry, because I had a lot of times in my life when something erased from my laptop or from my diaries. And as for me, social media is better variant for saving this text at all, especially in full invasion time.
No, that's interesting. It's an archive, right? I mean, you use it as an archive, but this is also, so the reason that I wanted to create an archive separate from Facebook, well, first of all, it was just to have an organized space without all of the other stuff, without all of the, the posts of cats and the posts of, the declarations and things like this. I wanted a separate place just to read the poetry. But it is, I mean, it's amazing. And I'm not a big fan of Facebook. I don't like to post on Facebook. I use it to self-promote if I'm giving a talk or something like that, like we all do. But I don't like to post random questions to my 1,600 closest friends regularly. But I do like it as a reader, because as an American who's trying to catch up, I mean, my last book was on the 1930s. The one before that was on the 19th century. As a reader who's trying to catch up with contemporary poetry in another place, in another language, it is a way of following that. And so in that sense, it's useful. But I am afraid Facebook someday, from one day to the next, will just disappear. And that's part of the reason that I want to copy all of my favorite poems so that I can keep them. But it's, I hear you saying something, Ia, which is really important, and that is that Facebook generates its own content, because you're writing to this big audience, and then there are certain emotional responses that are required. And I wonder, I mean, it is something that I've thought a lot about, that the poetry being posted to Facebook is changing, probably partly because of Facebook and because of the large international audiences that are reading it.
I have my last question now. And here we are 3 of us, and 2 of us were talking in a foreign language, and you were talking in your own language.
That's not very fair.
But we have such an opportunity to be distant a bit from our own language and from our own speech, me and Ia. And that's why just in this conversation, it's difficult to understand how deeply the language and our language and our speech changed during these 2 years, especially during these 2 years. And poetry shows this change also, not only, but. And I want to ask both of you, how do you understand this change of language now? Like everyday language, but also language of poetry and other kind of artistic speech. And how do you understand this change as a poet and as a translator? And whether it's possible to describe this change this change here and now. And I will start with Iya, and then we will listen to Amelia.
Oh.
I like your eyes.
Sorry. I don't know. I think our poetry gave us possibility to see how we change, how it's upgrading and changing our reality, and how language change, language at all, not only in poetry. Because what I see the same things between our photos. It's really awful process. How we become older and older every day. If you compare your photo 2 months ago, now it's something I don't know how it's described. And the same is the same process I see with language. A lot of words, a lot of phrases become very old, become very like this, like carpet. You know, if you use carpet, it's also the same clothes every day. I had this experience after 2014. You will see holes on these clothes, no, more faster than when you have big wardrobe and can change, because we have this like, I don't know, like one topic or one reality, like cage, where we sit, or not cage. Like, no, I thought about this small most of us solочки, that I don't know how we can it's translate. We pray for you our sweet, I don't know.
Sanya.
Maybe it's not like, I don't know. Yes, and I remember that first month it was not like commonplace. It was not like something ironical, because now it's only like, I don't know, like bad taste variant. One day I read this dialogue and Artem Polizhaka post between him and Mitrola Zutkin about this, and I don't know, and very often how change it. And it's impossible to be I don't know, inside ocean and try to understand if we will see shore one day. We need to do these things only, and we do very well on this poetic reality too. And about 2 months, I can say only one thing, that about 2 months, 2 years, I thought that we don't have language, we don't know how, I don't know, other people don't know, we don't have language. I read something about this, we don't, but I understand this is our new language of our poetry. This is our new language. And now I see some similar metaphors, not similar metaphors connected with with private language of each poet, but very, very, very similar ideas. And I understand that we very deep feel our time and each other, and do our best with our language, really. And but we can't, we have it with distance, because we're not like these people in museum who can look at the picture. We now part of this picture in the like work in progress. And it's impossible for me only to say something how all this change. One moment that I really hate this discussions about Renaissance of Ukrainian culture. I don't know, Renaissance of Ukrainian poetry with Ukrainian culture and poetry without this pressure of empire and all empire colonization process. Always on this aesthetic level was all okay. And but no, another question, why people abroad didn't see, because it's like according to Spivak, we hadn't possibility to be visible, to hearable, and other. Yes, but I don't know about change. And I don't know today, nothing.
Amelia?
No, it's an interesting question to ask both of us because, of course, Ia is living in Ukrainian and she can actually think about how language is changing. And I'm looking at it from outside. I mean, I've spoken already a little bit about metaphor and how I think. So Aristotle said that metaphor is used for a couple of different reasons, either to exalt an image or to denigrate it. And I think sometimes metaphor is now being used to denigrate metaphors. There's almost a kind of poetry against poetry that happens. So this is one of the ways that I'm seeing poetic language changing, that there's a sort of, I don't know, a humility about writing poetry. There's a lot of poetry being written, but the poetry is very much about, there's always something more important than the poem that you're supposed to see, right? Whether you're supposed to see that this poem can't raise the dead, or whether you're supposed to see that this poem is inadequate, provides a million inadequate metaphors for what's actually happening, which is losing one's home to war. And I think that denigration of metaphor has been really important. But I have, and I mean, you know this because you've seen some of my notes on this, but since we have this archive, Paige and I have also done a little bit of quantitative analysis because, you know, it's interesting to be able to count things. Literature scholars, and my training as a literature scholar is, you read something and you think about whether it makes you feel a certain way, and then you write about that way, you know, basically, right? You might bring in some literary theory so you sound extra smart, but in general, you know, you're reading a poem and you're saying, here is what's happening here, and this tends to happen in other places, and here's an example. It's very anecdotal. But something that people can do when they count things, which is usually not in the field of literature at all, but it's sort of sometimes starting to be, is that you can actually test that assumption and say, is this word becoming more common or not? And there are certain words that, using this archive, we used a Fisher analysis to actually statistically check to see whether certain words that were popping up more often were really statistically significant. And the words that were there were obvious ones, you would expect that. Vina in 2022 is more significant than 2014. In 2014, Maidan is more significant. That's kind of a test case. But then there are these other words that pop up in 2022. We're just comparing these 2 years. In 2022, stil, right? Table. And you start to, and that's really strong. It's very strongly significant that there are many more poems that use the word stil. And we're not counting the number of times it's mentioned, just in case someone writes an experimental poem with stil repeated 5 million times. It's only every poem that mentions this word at least once. And, you know, when I started to go back and look at which poems actually use stil, it's almost always a contrast between war and the table, right? The table has now been destroyed, the table that was laid. Looking at people in pictures from their Facebook posts where they're sitting around a table in a peaceful time. So this is one word that is really amplified, which is interesting. Another one that is a little bit less amplified in 2022 is susid, right, neighbor, which maybe makes a little bit more sense, right? Russia is the aggressive neighbor that's coming over, and there's all sorts of actual neighbors that are metaphors for the aggressor. But also people are more aware of their neighbors because they have to have different kinds of conversations with them. Or there's one poem that Leszek Panasiuk wrote in 2022 where he wrote about how in the future you'd hear the neighbor hammering on the wall to put in a new picture, and you would start because you would think that it was bombing or something like that. So the neighbors are reminders of fear coming from the outside. So the language that I see being changed is both on, the immediate response, right? My old school way of doing literary analysis, which is to say, I'm noticing a lot of metaphors for poetry not mattering. And then there's also this quantitative analysis that if you do it, you will see that language is changing. I mean, language always changes, but the way that language changes during a major political cataclysmic event is really striking. So that's been another interesting use of this new counting method, which I have to say I'm a novice at. I really am enjoying putting together an archive and doing the work of a librarian in that sense. But it's very new to me to actually think about using data, right? Is literature data? Is that a cold way to look at it? Well, no, because then you use it so that you can go back and look at it very closely. So that's been my experience of that.
That's the right time to ask questions for Amelia or for Iya from our audience.
I have one remark.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Just a minute.
Yes, I thought a lot about change, but not in poetry, but like in perception. But no, really, people tell that poetry is, oh my gosh, it's something difficult, complicate. I don't want to think about this. It's not for all. But now very often you can read poem, even it depends from your taste and reader's taste, and say that I feel the same, or I understand your feeling, or I understand what about this. And poetry in such time like war became very understandable thing, and think that help us to understand each other. And I don't know, it's not, and with situation like this show us that this is poetry of wartime, because because in arts, we like a little bit lost our privacy. I don't know, this is my question about our privacy in our poetry in future. And that's why it helps with to understand our feelings, because not all people can talk about feelings, and poetry help us a lot.
Thank you very much. And I know that we have a question. Yeah.
Можна на українську, якщо краще. We can turn the tables and I'll be the one, on the uncomfortable side of speaking in another language.
Roman has lost his voice. So, питання до Ії, так? Трохи, я буду допомагати, як. Ія, трохи технічне питання стосовно змісту вашої творчості. Дуже складно знайти ритм та структуру з розміром у ваших віршах. Чи позиціонуєте ви їх як вірші вільного характеру?
Iya.
Та й взагалі, на що її читати, правильно? Вибачте.
Він не працює.
А якою мовою я мушу відповідати?
Напевно, українською.
Чи не можу? Окей.
І це питання від аудиторії, від Романа, власне. Я озвучую, оскільки він втратив свій голос. В нього таке питання стосовно змісту вашої творчості. Дуже складно знайти ритм та структуру з розміром у ваших віршах. Чи позиціонуєте ви як вірші вільного характеру?
Та, знаєте, звучить як, знаєте, питання про публічний дім трошки. Вибачайте. Ну, я не можу
Я
бути
тобі скажу, що
серйозна.
я злякалася, що це до мене питання, тому що стільки ритму і структури, як в тебе, не знаю, в кого ще є.
Ну, про структуру я не знаю, а що стосується ритму, в мене є ритм. До речі, колись з Зеленою дуже давно ми якось, коли вона мені пояснювала, яку свободу дає білий вірш, вільний і все таке, і я так, і Олена каже, ну це ж коли зовсім і ритму немає. Думаю, ну я не підходжу, тому що в мене є музика, є ритм, ну принаймні є в мене в голові, і коли я читаю, у мене є ритм, його всі чують. Ну, те, що у нас подвійні наголоси в мові, і ще велика кількість людей російськомовних в анамнезі не знає, як це читати, то вже не зовсім моя проблема. Що стосується, ну, коротше, це було питання, як же так, чому ви не пишете, що ми там, силаботонікою, так? Ну, я не відчуваю, я світ не відчуваю силаботонічним. Для мене це, знаєте, як бюстгальтер. Він тобі має не заважати, а допомагати. Якщо тобі бюстгальтер не потрібен, ти ходиш без нього. А якщо він тебе робить, ну, якось, не знаю, комфортніше, а не комфортне без бюстгальтеру, ти робиш навпаки. А різниці, в принципі, немає, бо і там груди, розумієте?
Це ідеальне пояснення. Я з твого дозволу заберу його собі назавжди. You understand everything, yeah?
Ну, просто, ну, я не знаю, добре.
Do you have questions? Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful discussion. It was really interesting. My name is Sophia. I'm a student of KC, and nowadays I study cultural diplomacy as a subject, and I'm extremely curious from the point of view of introducing Ukraine from the side of culture. And I have a question to you, Emily, because you're the person who connects international readers to Ukrainian writers. And just from your personal perspective, maybe you can point out some Ukrainian authors from classical literature of Ukraine or probably modern literature of Ukraine who are not translated into other languages, or maybe translated but there is not that much attention that should be paid to them, so that Ukraine can be introduced to Western communities, to the world, from the cultural point of view in a better way.
Thank you for that question. That's really important, and it's something I think many of us in the translation community in the US are so taken by what's happening in the world of poetry in Ukraine that we've been very swept up in translating contemporary writers, because we have people like Iya who are writing really amazingly interesting poetry about the war, with you know, creative use of language and, you know, really beautiful lines and messages we need to hear now. And it's been important to me to translate that because of, you know, the immediacy of it. But many of us have backed up and started to have a conversation about what Americans also need to know. And part of this, I'm not only a translator, I'm also a professor of literature, and I teach courses on Ukrainian literature, and I need translations of them in order to do this. So, for example, I've been talking with Oleg Kotsuba, who is the editor at Harvard's Ukrainian series, who will be publishing Ia's book later soon. And he's working on a series of translations of Lesyu Ukrainka. We don't have very good translations at all of Lesyu Ukrainka, and so we need that to come out. So he's been working on that, and in fact, we just had a translation workshop at one of our big conferences, where together several of us worked through a couple of her poems that will be included in that. But oh my gosh, there's so many Ukrainian writers that we don't have in translation. There's a few here and there translations of poets of the generation of Stus, but not many. I mean, really not enough. Lina Kostenko, right? Stus, I mean, all of these writers from that generation are sort of lost to us. But also, I mean, I wrote my dissertation and my first book about the 19th century And I wrote about Kvitka Osnovyanenko. And, you know, Marusia is translated, but really nothing else is translated. So at one point I was like, oh, I'll teach my students Soldatsky Portret. No translation. So some of this is going back into literary history all the way back into the 19th century and reviving people to translate. There are translations of Kotlerevsky. They're not very good. And so those need to be revived and you know, renewed so that people can actually teach them. And my colleague, Yulia, with whom I translated Ia, is actually in the midst of a project of putting out theory and a little bit of poetry by modernists, by Ukrainian modernists. So for that, I worked with her a little bit on Rylsky and Tychina and Samanko. So there are several new translations that are not out yet, but they should be out very soon. So that's just a start, but we, you know, really, it's behind because that is one thing that Ukrainian poetry and literature in general needs, a history, a literary history.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I saw one more question.
So I would like to extend my deep gratitude for your commitment and contribution to Ukrainian poetry promotion abroad. My question is, if you have ever happened to translate foreign writers and poets who had encountered and undergone war conflicts or even full invasion, up to what extent is their literary voice different from Ukrainian standpoint in this concern?
Okay, well, you ask this question and my mind immediately goes to Paul Celan. Mm-hmm. Right, and there's so much Paul Celan in Ia's poetry, right? And I don't think it's just because both have experienced an invasion. I think it's also because Ia reads Paul Celan, but it's, you know, it's a conversation that happens. And I think that part of it is poets are seeing that experience, but part of it is the experience itself. So it's, you know, I don't know if we can make it a what is the cause and what is the correlation, but this would be an obvious one. I mean, I'm also a translator of Yiddish poetry, and I have translated a lot of Yiddish writers during World War II. And weirdly, many of the Yiddish writers that I've translated are from the United States, and they write about things like pogroms. But some of them are also from the Soviet Union, and they're writing about the experience of the war. And some of them are writing in a very pro-Soviet way. So they're completely different from the contemporary Ukrainian writers because they're oriented toward Moscow. Maybe they weren't in their hearts, but they were in their official outlook. And yet there's some similarities because I think they're experiencing a very traumatic moment in history. And they're also experiencing a moment when they're rethinking their identity. They're sort of rethinking where they sit in the world. And that would be another, people like Peretz Markish, David Hofstein, many of the images that they're describing. And of course, these are two poets born in Ukraine. So this is something else that I've seen. Others have found similarities to, you know, poetry from parts of the Arab world, either contemporary or parts of the Arab Spring. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
More questions, please? Do you have more questions, dear friends? If not, oh, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Camilla. I'm here doing a little bit of fundraiser. Oh, English, Ukrainian? Okay, yeah, I'm doing some fundraising back and forth between Ukraine and the US for Ukraine, of course. And what I noticed is I found myself translating a lot for the potential donors back in the US. And usually it's about the most recent events. And I noticed that as they ask questions, I'm trying to translate or explain to them about a particular event and already am trying to put the emotions into it. So how do you approach translation? And I noticed, like, I even took a screenshot of this 8 years of war back home. Everything is there, obviously, the timeline, the emotion, just like as in the original. But how do you go about it? Is it the emotion that you're trying to keep intact? Is it the event itself? Like, do you prioritize a certain thing versus the other over the other? I don't know if you could talk about that.
I had a wonderful translation teacher when I was in college named Mira Abramovna Shereshevskaya, and she gave me her 4 rules of translation, and it's a triage. The first thing you translate for is emotion. If you don't get the emotion, then there's no point. So that has to happen first. The second one is the basic facts. The third one is the literal meaning of the words. And then the fourth one is form, right? If you can get the rhyme in, great. If you can get the rhythm in, great, whatever that means. But the emotion is absolutely the most important thing. We were talking about literature. It's probably quite different if you're translating a legal document, but the emotion has to come through because that's the reason for the utterance, right? That's the thing, you know, Walter Benjamin in his Task of the Translator talks about the translation being part of the afterlife of the original. And what the original is drawn from is some kind of emotion, some kind of experience that then has these after effects, but they have to be true to that experience. So that absolutely comes first. And Ia and I have talked a lot about this. I mean, English is very different from Ukrainian. It's not like I'm translating into Polish. And so you have to do all sorts of gymnastics to get from, you know, Ukrainian case structure into something that works in English. So we go for something that is emotionally as true as possible, and then we try to get everything else as close as possible. And it's nice, you know, sometimes we'll get lucky and we'll find words that sound similar. But your story actually reminds me of an anecdote that I wanted to share about this archive, that I did share the password with a colleague who asked me for it a few months ago. This is my colleague Adrian Vonner, who teaches at Penn State. And his wife also teaches at Penn State, Catherine Vonner, and she's an anthropologist. And she's writing this study of war in Ukraine. She's writing about animals and how animals are suffering during the war. But she wants to start each chapter with a poem, and she didn't know where to find poems about animals. And Adrian, after I gave him the password to the website, printed out all of the poems that were marked with animals, and he gave them to her for her birthday. And she's now putting them in. So that made me, I was like, could you write that up as a testimonial in case I need to, like, you know, convince someone that we should be doing this? So I think the poetry sometimes it helps. I mean, it helps to get someone to, it's a wonderful illustration of what people are going through emotionally. And so it helps as a kind of, you know, little epigraph to get people into the other part of the story you're telling, whether it's asking for money or talking about animals.
If the audience do not have a question, then I will.
Should we end on?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That I remember that you have you promised to read a little bit of poetry.
Yeah, I think you should choose the next one because you know which ones I have printed out. It's the ones that you mentioned or that I mentioned to you.
Ну, може, люди втомилися.
We are okay.
Один.
Гуманітарку знов, так.
Гуманітарку, добре.
We have something like discussion between me and Amelia. For me, it was ironical text. Amelia really liked it. I don't know why. Я читаю перше. Ой, сорі. А де вона? Окей. Створили з пісень про війну підпільну гуманітарку. Вантажимо її у Європу, Америку, Індію та Китай. Торуємо шовковий шлях великої української літератури. Що везете, братчики, питаються на кордонах, мовчання вбране у кирилічні літери, живий вогонь свічечок букви «І», нашу і вашу свободу лягати у землю любові, поламаними деревами довгої пам'яті. Що везете, братчики, питаються наші мертві, історію роду з брудною шматою в роті, трухляві скрині життів, діда й баби, прабаби і прадіда, які ми століттями носимо на хребтах, мов Карпати. Що везете, братчики, питаються наші живі, рушники воєнного епосу і розтягнуті светри люті, недбалі креслення з мапами нової Європи, дитячі обкладинки майбутніх книжок. Що везете, братчики? Питаються, наші люстерка. Мідні грошики дихання в дірявих кишенях, тривогу повітря у вибитих шибках ротів, пульсуючи прожилки часу в червоних очах.
A bit of performance.
Maybe Ia's tired of this poem, or maybe she doesn't get the resonance with the U.S. I think I don't know about Ia. American readers love this poem. It's because it means it's simple. We are simple. Americans are very simple. But we also, it's a poem that,
Амелія,
yes,
just a moment, just a joke.
just read the poem. Just read the poem. No, but I want to say something, because the thing is, there's this idea of the humanitarian aid.
Make America great again with Ukrainian poetry,
That
please.
we're trying with every humanitarian aid kit. Yeah, but it reverses the humanitarka, right? There's this idea in the United States, Congress is talking about the aid packages and so forth that have to be sent to Ukraine. But the truth is that it does seem that Ukrainian poets are actually sending a kind of humanitarian aid to the US. This is what I was saying at the beginning, when I feel that we need Ukrainian poetry badly right now, because Ukrainian poetry is giving us a sense of what it means to determine your own future and not to leave it up to, let's say, some sort of oligarch or some sort of, new kind of totalitarian. Okay, I'll read the poem. We've packed a contraband humanitarian aid kit of war songs and shipped it to Europe, America, India, and China, paving the Silk Road of great Ukrainian literature. What have you got there, brothers? They ask at the borders. Silence, dressed up in Cyrillic letters. The sacred fire of the candlelight letter, Yi. Our and your freedom to lie in a land of love, like the broken trees of long memory. What have you got there, brothers? Ask our dead. The history of a tribe with a dirty rag in its mouth, rotting chests filled with grandparents' and great-grandparents' lives, which we've carried for centuries as if shouldering the Carpathians. What have you got there, brothers? Ask our living. Cloths embroidered with military chronicles and stretched out sweaters of wrath. Sloppy sketches mapping the new Europe. Children's dust jackets for future books. What have you got there, brothers? Ask our mirrors. Copper coins of breath in our ripped pockets, the disquiet of air in the broken frames of our mouths, the pulsing streaks of time in our red eyes.
Thank you very much for your attention. It was conversation about Ukrainian poetry in a global context, but also about love and confusion. And I would like to thank to the speakers, Iya Kiva and Amелія Глейзер, and to the organizers, Kyiv School of Economics and PEN Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Це можна